Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 81. And this episode, we are joined by Francesca Carletto-Leon. Francesca, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
I'm really excited to have you on. We connected through the wide world of Twitch and gaming and the incredible game StarCrossed, which you helped make a reality. And you were kind enough to come check out my stream at the tail end. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for playing it and sharing it with your community. We are a small studio, and this is our first wide-scale commercial release. So we're really relying on people to share with their friends and their community and really spreading it through the internet in that way. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And what company is that, and what is your role within it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a part of Contigo Games. We recently released StarCrossed, which is an action arcade game about magical girls in space. And my primary role on the team, so I work as the producer and also as the narrative designer. But as is typical with most indie studios, we all wear a lot of different hats. So I also helped with some of the 3D art. I do all of our social media, PR, marketing, that whole big management sort of umbrella as well.
Of course, yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. And how long was StarCrossed in development before it came out?
Oh, man. So it's been about 4 years, I think,
wow.
Give or take. Yeah. So our team, I guess, is a little bit unconventional, but we work part-time. We all work in tech and games as day jobs as well. So StarCrossed has kind of been our side hustle for forever. So we worked on it very slowly and diligently for 4 years.
That's cool.
Wow, that's amazing. And a part-time passion project at that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think I wouldn't want to make another big game in that way because it's definitely a hard way to work. You rely a lot on the commitment and the motivation of your team. So I'm really grateful for the folks on my team that we were able to work together and push this through to the finish line because, man, games are hard to make.
They really are. Yeah. This is why Matt and I just talk about them for the most part.
Yeah. The rest of it I leave to the true professionals. Well, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about StarCrossed because I really love it, and I've been watching it since I first heard about it. And then I think I first saw it in person. You guys had a booth at PAX East, right? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
And so that's when I first really got hands-on and got to see it in person, but I'd been following it online for a little while. And getting to play it, I mean, even what impresses me about the game is not only the gameplay and the basics of it, but the storytelling and the visuals and the narrative and the writing. All of it feels, I mean, it's an indie game, but it feels so polished that I would even forget that it was an independent game, and I would assume it was made by a major publisher. It finds its voice and its sense of humor so fast and early in the game. I think it's really impressive. Was that, as one of the focuses for you being the narrative designer, was that really important to find the game's voice as soon as possible and understand how this world and these characters exist?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. I think the tone of the game and how we were presenting the content went through a lot of iteration over the years. I think it did take us a while internally to really nail down sort of the mood or the aesthetic that we were going for. We knew we always wanted it to be about magical girls and this team coming together to achieve their goal. But I think finding a way to have that sort of be presented in a game and in UI elements, for example, that was a really interesting challenge. So we went through a lot of iteration. And that's the same case with story mode as well, where we were finding a balance between, we don't have the scope and the possibility to make a 60-hour RPG or something. So we needed to figure out how we were going to present these characters in a succinct way that was still appealing and is still going to let players really get to the heart of who they are and what this world is about. So thank you. I'm really glad to hear that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, the design is really great also because obviously it's advertised as a co-op game. And very early on, playing it by myself on the stream, I realized, oh, this is this can be played if you're very skilled.
Yes.
As a one-player game, but as a not very skilled gamer, I was not able to get very far. But it was still fun the whole time. But I think that's really intelligent design to be able to create a game that's meant to be multiplayer, but can still function and even function well if you have the skill for it as a single-player game. I'm guessing that was important, as just releasing something as co-op isn't really an option because you want to have some kind of single-player experience as well.
Yeah, I think that was super tricky and something that is pretty unique to this game specifically. We as a team, we never say like single player mode because we really believe that, yeah, as you said, like that's not the way it was intended to be played. So it's not the optimal experience that we would like players to have with the game. So we never say single player, we say like split controller mode. So yeah, trying to get around that a little bit. But so split controller mode, it does allow for, single player. But we also wanted to make sure that if you're two people with one controller, you're still able to engage with the game in that way with that hardware. So we see a lot of folks doing that as well.
Yeah, and whether that's casual or I see a lot of speedrunners do that with other games. It's kind of a wonderful concept. Yeah,
I think I've definitely been immensely impressed by folks who will like S-rank story mode playing by themselves. It kind of blows my mind because I've obviously have played a ton of StarCrossed during testing and development, but like I don't think I could do that.
Well, and it's interesting that you have worked on a game that is very much about cooperative play, and certainly Magical Girls, it's, teams coming together and working together. Mm-hmm. Do you find in a lot of the other stuff you work on, whether for your day job or independent work, that's much more about communication and cooperation like that?
Yeah, so I guess as a little bit of context, so for my day job outside of Contigo, I work on educational games, mostly client work. Filament. Yeah, so I'm at Filament. So I get to work on all sorts of different types of games and design challenges. I'm a game designer there. So the variety of games that I get to work on is really fantastic. And I think it helped with developing StarCrossed, because StarCrossed as well, like we're sort of like genre mashing a little bit. Like we have some visual novel elements. We have this sort of like action arcade style gameplay. So, and we're heavily borrowing inspiration from like bullet hell as well. So we're taking all of these different genres and trying to find a way to put them together in a way that is like coherent and makes sense for gameplay, and feels good in terms of, player experience. So I definitely consider myself a very like multidisciplinary and kind of like all over the place designer, where I like to take on like all different aspects of design in my work.
Very nice. Well, and I mean, nowadays working, whether at Filament or for Contigo or other independent ventures, you have to wear a lot of hats. What was sort of your start into the games industry? Where did you first see yourself and get into the biz? Yeah, so it's been a windy road, but I think that for most folks in the games industry, we definitely come from very diverse backgrounds. I think that's what makes games really neat, because there's just like so many disciplines and skill sets that are needed to make a game. So folks come from all over the place. But so like I'm a little unique in that I have always done games. I'm not coming from another industry. But I'm coming from other disciplines within games. So I did my undergraduate working on a major for interactive media, and also writing was my other major. And that major focused on, so like it was born out of a computer science department. So it was a very technical approach to like, how do we build technologically advanced, impressive games, which was really useful and, a skill set that I needed. But I found that it wasn't really what I was interested in as a developer. So when I came out of school, I started working with some local studios, mostly in like community management and production roles, because I found I really enjoyed that more like social aspect of the games industry. So I did that for a while, and then I sort of got to this point where I was deciding, okay, do I want to like, really commit, and like my career and what people know me for is going to be community management based.
Or do I want to shift a little bit and go back into this more development style role that I was in previously? So about 3 years ago, I decided to go to the game design master's program at the NYU Game Center. So I just wrapped that up last year, but that's it was an extremely intense program. I was I was very tired, but I think it was the pivot that I needed in my career to really kickstart myself as a designer. So that gave me a lot of really great opportunities and folks to work with, really fantastic mentorship. So from there, I've sort of pivoted into being a designer full time, and bringing the experiences of working on games and being in the industry, to found Contigo and get that rolling as well.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
And what's really great is that Geoff and I our show has not always been an interview-based show. We've tried to celebrate games in any way we can, but we've found that more recently it's been a lot of fun to also talk about folks within the industry that maybe gamers don't really have a perspective on. It's very easy to just play games and love games and not really think about what goes into making them, which is fine. It's not a requirement to play them, but I personally think it's fascinating to learn this stuff. And I never assume that all developers know each other, but I thought it was very funny when I sent you our show. The first thing you noticed is that we did an interview with James, who's currently working on a puzzle dating sim, which I'm so excited to come out. But that leads to my next question: is meeting folks like James, is that really important and integral to growing your games and making connections? I assume so, but I thought it was very funny that the minute I sent you our show, you're like, "Oh, Rude Ghost, I know James. He's great."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're hitting on the big thing that I go off on hour rants on. But the games industry is it is pretty small. We're pretty tight knit, and you always find that you're kind of 1 or 2 degrees away from every other developer in the industry. There's a lot of overlap. Even with AAA folks. I've never worked AAA, but through having met people and having them move into those roles, or friends of friends, it's we all have those connections sort of spread throughout the industry, which is really fantastic. And I definitely thrive on that. So yeah, James and I met because I used to be Boston based. And the community there is really fantastic. There's one event every single week. There's too many meetup events for developers in Boston. But so just that sense of community, I think, is extremely important to me. I think I wouldn't be able to make games if I ever lived somewhere that didn't have an active community that was really supporting each other. I think that's something when I talk to students or do any sort of speaking, and they're like, "What's the most important thing about how do I become a game developer?" I always say it's just the secret is really being nice to people and building that sense of community. And when you give to a community and you show that you're supporting other developers, when the time comes when you need support, for StarCrossed, we did a Kickstarter, right? And I think the only reason that Kickstarter was able to be successful is because we were, active in our communities, and we were demoing our game, and we were going to events, and we were speaking, and we were really fostering those connections before we needed that support. So yeah, I think it's I think it's super, super important to put time into maintaining those relationships and supporting other developers as well.
For sure. I feel like those kinds of games aren't going to gain traction unless folks support each other. And even as an independent podcast, Geoff and I said pretty early on that while we're of course going to talk about AAA titles because we love our fair share of them, we wanted to focus a lot more on indie sides of game development, or indie sides of those stories, or just indie games in general, because they need the most voices, right? They need those are the ones that are most important to lift up, because they don't have the giant marketing budgets of the larger games.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now, having gone through this sort of launching a very more commercially focused game for the first time, I'm definitely understanding that the marketing and the visibility is so important, but it's so difficult. It's really challenging. through the Kickstarter, we were able to get a little bit of funds for specifically marketing and like having someone come on to help us do that. And still, I think I wish we could have invested so many more resources and so much more time into it. But yeah, it just takes so much work, and getting noticed is like immensely difficult when there's, hundreds of games coming out every single day, right? Yeah, just finding your audience and finding your community, I think is really important. But yeah, it's I think something we struggled with, and I think most indies struggle with.
Because it's one thing you can take your time developing a game. You can be one person, in a basement, in a one room, whatever. But yeah, once you got to reach out, it's suddenly a whole new game.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I think that that like ending push of visibility was not for launching a game was not something we have done before. So it wasn't something we were really like prepared to do. So we're kind of learning as we go. But I think I think this is important for indie games in general, but we made it part of our development to go out to events and like demo, both to get feedback, but also to put it in front of players. And because we've been doing that over 4 years, we have a lot of folks who've seen us at MagFest, at PAX, at the Boston Festival of Indie Games multiple times. And because we were able to have that like personal interaction with them and chat with them about the game, they're still following our development, and like they're still supporting the game all the way up until launch. So that's been really fantastic to see as well.
That's fantastic momentum. Yeah. Now, a question as far as community and development goes. You've made a few games on your own for more like game jam kind of things too, right?
Yeah. So I've done so many game jams. I love game jams. And then also I have a bunch of independent work as a designer, most of it that I was doing during my time at New York University as well.
Very cool. Now, a lot of those, for those who aren't familiar, game jams are limited time themed ideas where several developers will just create games with whatever limitations are chosen with what resources they have, and they're just put up. Sometimes they become bigger ideas. Sometimes they are simply absurd.
Those are the best ones, though.
Oh, those are the best ones. And sometimes those are the ones that really should become the bigger ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does creating something for a game jam compare and contrast to creating a large, small team commercial work like StarCrossed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think game jams are fantastic because they give you the space and the opportunity to really like flex skills that you don't normally use, right? So like, so I'm primarily a designer, but when I go into game jams, like I'm coding, I'm doing 3D art, I'm like rigging, I'm throwing stuff into the game.
Whole hat collection.
Yeah, exactly. And I really enjoy that because though my skills in those disciplines aren't at sort of like a more professional level where I'm doing that as my career, they are parts of game development that I super duper enjoy. So it's always fun to get to do that. And also just working with other developers that you haven't worked with before, but it's in this sort of like limited time and more casual sort of environment. Like you're not committing to years and years of working together. So I think that's also really great. But I think, game jams are great because they are, it's more like this like rapid prototyping, right? Where sort of you're taking one really strong, small idea, and that's what you're building. So it makes this like really like great little prototype or like proof of concept of this idea that, as you said, like could grow into its own whole entire large scale game. And I think actually as a fun fact for StarCrossed, our very first prototype we did make at a game jam. So it's very common that those projects do grow larger. The game jam that we did for StarCrossed, I absolutely don't recommend this format, but we did a 3-hour game jam. Like we tried to make a game in 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't recommend it. It felt really stressful. But basically like we just prototyped our one mechanic of having this projectile bouncing between two characters. And that's all we got done in 3 hours. But we were just from that able to see that folks that we showed it to were interested, and they were like, there's something cool here, and I think you should keep looking at it. So we kind of took that and started running with it and just expanded first the gameplay and then sort of figuring out the aesthetic and the world of the game as well.
Yeah, I love that StarCrossed is a celebration of magical girl anime and those kinds of things. There's some Power Ranger-esque kind of stuff in it too, just the way it's set up and the way the narrative progresses.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to ask you an impossible question. Do you have a favorite character of the 5 main heroes?
I do actually.
Yeah, all right, easy answer.
I feel like I shouldn't because like they're like my babies, right? Like I shouldn't have a favorite child. But I think out of and also because I wrote them, right? I'm like very close to these characters. But I think out of the characters, I'm really a fan of the Outlaw, who is our like 8 foot tall, buff purple lady character. I love her so much, and she's really cool.
Taste. Yeah, when I was playing the opening of the game and I was commenting on all the archetypes, I saw like a character who seemed to be brooding, wearing all black, and I was like, aha! I found my favorite character before she even spoke a word.
Something for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like we've been successful in this based on just like player feedback, but I think we've been able to design a cast where every player is able to find a character that they really like and identify with. So that's been fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's quite brilliant, the diversity of the characters, the humor of the writing, and like that even the first boss fight, so I guess kind of spoiler alert, though it's very early on in the game, the first boss fight becomes a playable character as well, and that it's someone who's being controlled. And that, like, I went on to the next stage as the Outlaw and what is the robot character? The android? I'm playing.
Oh, the weapon. Yeah.
And that there's a whole conversation between the two characters about being controlled and being forced to do things against your will and how that makes you feel and how you cope with it. And like, I didn't expect that because there was so much comedy earlier on and snarkiness to then go diving into a deep exploration of like what it's like to be forced to do something against your will and like to not be okay with it, and that being okay was really stunning. Was that important to put those kinds of conversations in the game, to have I guess quote unquote real issues discussed within this game about fantastical folks knocking a star around?
Yeah, I like how you put that at the end there. Yeah, I think just so for us, we were really thinking about like the sort of like magical girl genre and the themes that come with it. We were really looking at what are the parts of that make that media important to us? Like what are the elements or what are the issues that the characters are grappling with that make us, you know, feel for them or make us feel like they're like us. So that was definitely something we were exploring as we were creating the characters from the get-go. Sort of like what is, you know, what are their goals? What are their conflicts with themselves and with the world? And then from there exploring like when we put them with this character, what is their tension point? And then what is the allure of this relationship or what makes them click? So really you know, our story mode isn't super long. It takes about an hour to play through with each pair. But we wanted to make sure that we were exploring those tensions and giving some depth to these relationships and these characters as well.
That's fantastic. I love the thought that goes into this kind of stuff. You know, I'm always fascinated by narrative. I've played a bunch of games recently that have a heavy narrative focus and diving deep in story. And I think that regardless of the length of the campaign, the fact that it was important for y'all to incorporate real conversations and real character development is great, because you could have just made an arcadey game that had some aesthetics and it you know, people might have received that just as well, but the fact that you found an importance to going beyond that, I think shows in the quality of the work that came out of this game.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think when we first started demoing the game, we were just showing the gameplay. But as soon as we had these characters in this like arcade style game, people kept asking us like, what's their name? Like, what are they like? What's their personality? And like, they really wanted to get to know these characters. So we kind of took that and just like ran with it for story mode. But I think like when I think about magical girl media or even just like, you know, like anime in general, I think for these types of characters and this type of story, there's always sort of like there is that like balance between like humor and lightheartedness, and sort of like this sort of more gentle narrative. And then there's the more deep conversations where like it's high emotions, and the emotions are the conflict that they're sort of navigating over. And I think that's really neat. Like when you look at Sailor Moon, or you look at I'm rereading Tokyo Mew Mew right now, which is one of my like all-time favorite like magical girl stories. But it's so interesting because they're fighting monsters, and like, yeah, obviously that's a big deal because they're fighting monsters and they're like saving the world. But there's also like romance drama, but that's treated with the same importance as the like fighting monsters, because they're both like high stakes emotional situations for the characters. And I just think that's really neat that they're both treated with such importance. So we wanted to bring that in, where we're not only saving the universe, but we're also on this journey of self-discovery and like expressing that that's a really difficult thing for people to do as well.
It is. Now, the gameplay and the design and everything all complements itself and each other so well. You first made the gameplay at a 3-hour game jam. At what point was it already the idea of a magical girl kind of thing that you just were shooting a star back and forth, or how far along was it before it became a magical girl narrative?
Yeah, so the original 3-hour game jam, so we did have these two characters, and we were like, okay, it's in space because they're flying or something. This was very like, we decided all of this in like 15 minutes, right? So
I played Castle Shikigami. If you want people flying around shooting things without weapons, I will accept it. This is fine.
Yeah, we were just like, how do we sort of justify what's going on here? Like, what does this game look like? But so like the original two characters that we like threw in for the game jam, we had like this little like cute alien girl, and then we had like her like, yes, we had this alien girl who was really adorable, and then we had an astronaut girl. So we had this like
cool.
10-second idea that it was just like, the astronaut is like in space and like, I don't know, doing something, and they find an alien, and like now they're working together, and it's great. So I think like that's where the space aspect of StarCrossed came from. And then as we were exploring the aesthetics and the storytelling a little bit more, and sort of establishing, what the actual narrative is, that's when we brought in the magical girl element. And I think that was an interesting challenge because Sailor Moon is like, it has space themes, but you don't see that reflected a lot in like their outfits, or like the aesthetic of the characters. So when we were designing the cast for StarCrossed, we were like, okay, it's got to be like very cute and very sparkly, but it also has to be like a little bit sci-fi. So I think that was a little bit challenging. So we worked with this really fantastic character designer who did all of our designs and our illustrations, to sort of balance those two elements in the visuals.
Yeah, but even from the very beginning, you created the stable gameplay loop at the outset, and it was still about cooperation and friendship. And it's kind of hard to like get those sort of themes to come through in the base gameplay so much. So I think that is a testament to the strength of the design.
Yeah, I think like our team came together because we were like a group of friends who were making games casually together at the time, and just really enjoyed working together. And because of that, we were also, a friend group, as friend groups do, where we're playing a lot of multiplayer games together, right? And we're always looking for new things to pick up when we're hanging out. And we just noticed that like we wanted more multiplayer games, so then we were like, hey, maybe we should just make one.
and a local couch multiplayer game.
Because I think
that seems to be a dying breed.
At that time in my life, I was mostly playing games on the couch with friends, like even single player games. Like we would do the thing where we would all gather around the TV, right? And like one person would kind of do like a live let's play, right? And we're just sitting there and absorbing the media together. So I was consuming games in that way a lot at the time when StarCrossed was like first conceived.
And that actually brings me to my next question. I want to dive a little deeper into your gaming history a bit, starting with one of my favorite questions to ask. But what is your earliest gaming memory, like the most passionate one? So like the first console you bought that you really remember being excited for, the first game you couldn't wait to play. Like how far back does that go, and what games or consoles were those?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to have a family member who gifted me a Game Boy back in like, I think I was like 6 at the time or so. But so I received for Christmas like a Game Boy, and I got Pokemon Blue. So that was my very first gaming experience.
That's a good start.
Yeah,
good
and I think
start.
like, man, it's so good, so good. And like Pokemon is still such a big part of, what I play. Like it's one of the very few games that I get on launch every single time they release one. But yeah, so like Pokemon was a huge inspiration for me, and like getting me into gaming. Yeah, and then sort of like my next like very vivid memory of like getting into games was playing Jak and Daxter on a friend's dad's PlayStation so I used to go over there for like, after school when my parents couldn't pick me up, and we would just play this game every single day after school. So that's a really vivid memory for me as well, because that was one of the earlier home console experiences that I had.
Because those are your origins, do you tend to lean into RPGs and platformers more than other games?
Yeah, I definitely think for a very long time, through like middle school, high school, I was super into RPGs. I started getting into Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy. So those were a lot of the games that I was playing. And I think that's why I'm so interested in games narrative, because a lot of what I loved about these games is that I was falling in love with the characters and like experience like the heartbreak of like their traumas and things. So it was like, I don't know, it was a very like that was really like drawing me into the experiences.
Yeah, it's very easy, I think, as kids, depending on how you grow up, but as most of us, I can assume, grew up as nerds, maybe picked on a little bit, that dramatic games brought out the internal drama in you, and you wanted to explore that, especially if, like, your Final Fantasy VIIs and, your Pokemons, where it's, like, all about grand adventure and heartbreak and all of that stuff. I think it's easy to see yourself in a lot of that. I mean, who of us has not named a main character in a game after ourselves or one of the other characters? Like, who among
absolutely.
us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way to put it. Yeah, I think just like I think also when you're going through like difficult times as a teenager, I think that's why so many teenagers get into games. But like seeing like, oh my God, like, Sora's dealing with all this crap and like all this stuff is happening and everything is terrible. And then I'm thinking about like, my own day-to-day troubles, and they feel a little bit smaller. So I don't know. I think that's something that's appealing, as well as like the drama of games, and sort of how we can lose ourselves in that.
With that, and with your gaming development, we're now at in an era of games where it feels like anything is possible, right? Like if you can think of it, someone can make it. And yet, games like StarCrossed, which aren't, necessarily the most graphical powerful or data powerful or whatever, can find success too, because folks want more isolated or unique experiences that are maybe a little more compact. Do you find as you get older, as someone who plays games, do you still want massive 50 to 60 to 100-hour experiences? Or do you find yourself leaning into more independent stuff that's shorter experiences or more arcadey that you can kind of pick up and put down?
Yeah, I think definitely just because I am very busy and because of how adult life is structured, I find that I don't have a ton of opportunity to really sit down with those longer AAA games. I mean, more recently, because I'm stuck at home, I'm actually like going back and playing all the games that I feel like I should have over the years.
Sure.
So that's given me more space to do that. But generally, I'm picking up smaller games. I'm picking up a lot of games on my Switch because I can take it with me. Like if I'm traveling, that's a really good opportunity where I'm like stuck somewhere. Yeah, where I'm stuck somewhere and I'm gonna play this game. Yeah, but I find that it's, I'm more drawn smaller experiences due to time, but also I'm really interested in like alternative gameplay and very like emotionally driven games. So focusing on that like emotional design aspect. And I find that obviously AAA games are incorporating these elements, but I find that they're really starting at the indie level. And if you want to play something that is going to like tug at your heartstrings or that you have never seen before, I think you should be looking to the indie scene for that. So I do play a lot of indie games just because I'm frequently like just dazzled by the creativity of people and like what they're able to make.
So yeah, and you're absolutely right. The idea cycle is kind of the indie studios take the bold choices, create the great genre mashups, which then trickle into AAA titles over the next 5 years or so. Is there anything going on in indie games now, whether it's something you have made or something you've seen other people do, ideas that you're excited to see make that trip in a couple of years?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I have a specific answer. I'm trying to think about like trends in. Oh, okay. Here's my answer. So I think one movement that I'm seeing at the indie level right now that is really interesting, and I think AAA games are starting to catch on to, is this idea of like cozy games. So these are games that are a lot more focused on rather than these like fight or flight sort of like intense mechanics. They're more focused on the ideas of like repair and self-care and reflection. So I think you're seeing that emerge in the indie scene, both in terms of like very, very small indies that are doing sort of like very experimental things, but also like more visible indies like Ooblets. Like Ooblets is, I think, going to be huge because people really want that sort of more gentle content. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I think, it's been a while since there's been an Animal Crossing, but I think you can look at Animal Crossing also as a AAA example of that, right? Where it's more based around this idea of like nurturing and curating, and people really love that. And I think there's not enough of that going on in the AAA space right now. So I do hope that that becomes more of a movement, and we start to see like big budget games also taking these design inspirations.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. And I think, like, for me personally, the one I would love to see more AAA studios do is let you date your weapons, because I think that's going to be the future of games. Sorry, I take every opportunity on the show to mention Boyfriend Dungeon, because I've never been so excited.
Oh my God,
to date
shout
a
out
weapon.
to Kip Fox. I'm so excited.
I met.
Yeah, I think it's just like that space to be like goofy, right? And that space to be silly, and I think also like they're doing something, or like StarCrossed is doing what they're doing is like this like idea of genre mashing, right? And like putting in these more like relationship building elements into otherwise like very action packed like gamey gameplay.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I think the big hyphen outshoot, I suppose, in genre mashups was roguelikes and procedurally generated things.
Yeah.
And definitely in recent years, it's been a little more the visual novel, dating mechanics, friendship things. And I think that goes towards what you were talking about in the more cozy style. And yeah, it's kind of a nice shift. Like a lot of things I see now, it's like, oh, it's got a visual novel style. All right, cool. Who do I get to date, or what kind of relationships am I building?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the games industry is also like part of this is the games industry starting to acknowledge the different types of people that play games and the different aspects of games that draw people in. So like, as I said, like I'm a very narrative and emotions driven player. So I'm seeking out those types of experiences. So I do find that more narrative heavy content is something that appeals to me. So like that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other people are too. So if you can bring those elements into other types of games, you're going to have a game that appeals more widely to more types of people. And that's definitely something we were trying to achieve with StarCrossed once we saw this interest of players wanting to get to know the characters and know more about them. Like we definitely saw that we have this, we have one audience that's really in it for this like gameplay style, and then we have another audience that's really in it for the aesthetics and for the narrative and for the characters and their story.
Yeah, it's nice to have several means of entry. Now, do
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
find, did you ever see any like smaller, more, I guess, arcade style, smaller gameplay loops that do a good job of telling their narrative through what they project? I mean, StarCrossed, you had the cooperation built in, the friendship building built in from the get-go. Do you see that in other games, or any in particular that really stand out to you?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think like specifically for like whenever people talk about like really tight game loops and sort of like, yeah, how that reiterates into the world of the game and the narrative building. I always think about Minute, which came out a couple years ago now, maybe.
Time is weird.
Time is so weird.
It's so weird. I'm looking it up.
Okay,
2018.
thank you. 2018. Yeah, but that's a game that, it's meant to be like extremely quick loops of gameplay, and you actually kind of like start over, but you're able to like expand your knowledge of the world and like how you're able to explore it through each loop. And I think that's a really creative way to use tight game loops to keep players engaged, but also have it be like part of the world and how you're interacting with it.
Yeah, when you can give the player the feeling you want the character to be feeling, you know, with little to no text, you've done such a great job.
Exactly. I think games like that are really neat. I'm working on another game right now. I don't know if you mind if I plug it for a moment.
Please plug away. Anything, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm working on another game right now called We Should Talk, which you can find on Twitters and all the places. But We Should Talk is a short form narrative game about the nuance of language. And I feel like this fits into this conversation very well, because this is a game that's meant to be played. So like a playthrough is like about 15 to 20 minutes. It's very short, and you're meant to play the whole thing in one sitting. But the core mechanic of this game is, instead of choosing like entire dialogue options, as you would say in like a normal visual novel, we have what we're calling a sentence spinner, where you're actually able to put together modular pieces of sentences to make coherent thoughts that you're saying.
Sort of
so
like
it's
a
like
generative text thing, like when you're on your phone, it suggests words.
Exactly. So like we wanted to explore these ideas of like, it's not exactly like what you say, but it's really like how you're saying it and how you're communicating. So like, even taking from like couples therapy, right? Where it's like you talk about the importance of like saying you or we or I in a sentence, and how that completely changes how it's understood. So this was something where, we have like a very small game loop where you're meant to go through this content multiple times, and express yourself in different ways to see how you're understood by other characters. And I think that's something that, like players have been really enjoying, because there is a nuance there, and also like the mechanic of this sentence spinner. You have so many different ways you could say something. We wanted to convey this idea of like, I don't know, like option paralysis, where you're like, I have so many things I could say. What's the right thing to say? I don't know how to communicate this to you. And I think that's a very like high stakes sort of emotional situation, but we're really just giving you like this one little mechanic to toy with.
It definitely taps into some people save right before a big boss fight, some people save right before conversations, just in case they get them wrong.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think they both have very, very high stakes, right? They're both really valuable emotional experiences for players.
There's consequences and fallout to both.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm currently finally playing through the Outer Worlds, and I love Obsidian, and I loved Fallout New Vegas was my favorite of the modern Fallout games. And so like I find myself caring more about moments where I have to do something conversationally that I might screw up than the action stuff. Like, I don't care if I die in a fight, but like there's a quest line where you have the opportunity to bring two characters together. And I'm like, this is way more interesting to me. It goes back to the cozy thing too, right? Like, I'm so excited about helping this relationship develop between two other characters. Also because like in most AAA games, the relationship is you. Like every pretty character is flirting with you and not each other. And like this idea that you can curate relationships between other characters is really brilliant.
I'll burn down the whole bunker, but I don't want the robot to be upset with me.
Right. Exactly. I feel like it makes you feel more ingrained in the world, right? Because you're suddenly a part of these other characters' lives. Like when you're fighting a boss, you kind of feel like, oh, this is like part of the game, and it's very like, you know, a gameplay mechanic, and I meant to do this. But I feel like when you're like, adjusting how people interact with each other or their relationships, you really feel like you're altering like the fabric of like the game space. I don't know. It's a weird power fantasy.
It's an incredible thing. Yeah.
Totally. Are there any either indie or AAA games that are coming out that you're looking forward to, or now that at least when we're recording, who knows by when this releases, but while we're recording, we're in a quarantine. Are there games that you're looking forward to playing that maybe aren't new, but are just things you haven't played yet?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what is on my list. I guess like as a quick shout out to if you enjoy StarCrossed, you will probably also enjoy this game. But there's a visual novel called Arcade Spirits, and it just released on Switch, I think like 2 days ago or so. So it just came out. And I actually haven't had a chance to sit down with it yet. So I'm, as I said, like I tend to pick up games on my Switch a lot now because I'm able to like, you know, play it in different rooms of my house and take it with me when I'm traveling. So I'm really excited to pick that one up. And I think if you're into StarCrossed for the narrative and the visual novel elements and the like inclusivity of the cast and the characters, I think you'll super duper love Arcade Spirits. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm trying to think, I was really looking forward to The Last of Us 2, but now I'm sort of just in stasis. I don't know. We're all waiting.
Fair.
It'll happen someday. Since I've been home a lot, I've been playing through the Uncharted series, which I had never played past Uncharted 2. And it's really left me wanting more of that like Naughty Dog style like exploration and content. So yeah,
I knew there was another reason I liked you, because I've literally done the same thing. I had the Uncharted trilogy since it came out on PS4, and I played the first 2 games in completely back to back, and then most of the way through the 3rd game, and then I guess something came out and I dropped it. And then like a couple weeks ago, I was like, oh yeah, I have PlayStation Plus. I got Uncharted 4 for free. I should finish this. So I finished the 3rd one and started the 4th one. And I'm the same way, like having only recently played the first Last of Us and now playing the Uncharted games. I'm like, these games are good because this company knows what they're doing. And even when not everything lines up perfectly, the main things are so satisfying. Like I will never have a problem exploring in the Uncharted games. The traversal mechanics are so tight. Like it's what I want in every game because because you're an explorer, it's so integral to the narrative. And like in the 4th game, there's a grappling hook that's just so satisfying to use and you use all the time. And I'm like, yes, this is what I want. Give me more.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. We, so I played it with like my housemates and we super enjoyed it. I remember I played the first one like in one sitting when I was like in high school or something. Right. I was like, oh, I'm going to like start this game Uncharted. I don't know. People talk about it. And then I like stayed up until 6 a.m. right. Playing the entire thing in one sitting.
That's right.
And absolutely loved it. Yeah. And then I think I started the second one and yes, like something happened and I dropped it for a while. And now many, many years later, we've actually played through the entire series. But yeah, just like I super enjoy it. But I also think because I haven't really engaged with a lot of AAA games recently, like I do tend to stick more indie, or I'm playing things like Animal Crossing and Pokemon.
Sure.
I was so impressed and astounded by the environments that are in Uncharted 4 specifically. Like it just blows my mind how beautiful they are and how creative, and also how they utilize the space for mechanics and for gameplay. Like everything there has a purpose and is placed with intention, but also like looks really gorgeous. So I was just like, I really enjoyed it. I wish I could just like play a version of that game that was just the exploration and just me like walking around looking at things. I think that would be really neat.
Yeah, I've heard I've heard that in the new Assassin's Creed games, the one that takes place in Egypt and the one that takes place in Greece.
Oh yeah, because they offer just like they call it like historic mode or something, right? Where you're just able to. I think that's awesome. That's so neat.
And it like teaches you about the areas.
And you know what? They put so much effort into making those worlds. I think the developers want you to get to see all the hard work.
Yeah,
it's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I think also when it's when it's the opportunity to like explore a city, right, in history, or have this recreation that I know that team's like they are extremely accurate and they do tons of research, and I think like that's also a really neat educational tool as well for folks that are interested.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I'll take screenshots of indie games and be like, look how cool this sprite work is, look how cool this art is. But when I'm playing a AAA game, the only thing that's different is like I'll take a photo because I'll realize I've been standing in one place looking out over the ocean for a good 2 minutes because of just how real it looks. And like with indie games, a lot of the time it's the artistic nature of it. It's what the design, like how creative the design is. But in AAA games, it's just like, wow, this looks like life. This looks real. Like, how is this possible? Like my constant thought through the remake of Final Fantasy VII is this looks better than Advent Children, a movie that we thought like the graphics will never be this good. And now I'm playing graphics in gameplay that are better than that. It's astonishing to me.
Yeah,
and like,
it's incredible.
I think as a gamer, that's kind of the joy that I hope never goes away, is like constantly being in awe of stuff. Because that's my favorite thing about games and the games industry is just whether it's the design, the narrative, the story, or the pure prettiness of it. Like I love being enamored by that stuff.
Yeah, I think building off of that, like indie games are so interesting to me because like also as a developer, I can look at them and see like they were really creative or they did something unusual here. And often it's because as indies we're dealing with, scope constraints, budget constraints, or like skill limitations in certain team dynamics. So like you're really having to find creative ways to problem solve and to build and design your game. That was definitely something with StarCrossed where we're a relatively new team. And I think it was very much like figuring out how can we build the best game that we can build with the skills and the resources that we have at our disposal. So like finding creative solutions, but then you go into the AAA space and like they have the opposite issue, right? Where like they have the funding and they have the skills and they could do literally everything. So when you can do literally everything, what do you spend time on and like what do you put in your game? So I think it's like two different approaches to making games, but they both have really great outcomes.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
So is there anything in the future or on the drawing board? You don't have to talk about it now for Contigo.
Yeah, so the future is a secret at the moment because as I said, so we've been a part-time team for a very long time, and I think if we do decide to work on another long-term project, we need to shift the format of how we're working just so it's more sustainable and manageable for our team. So right now we're sort of in the exploration phases of how we can be shifting and sort of what we could be doing next. So as a team, we're having those discussions now. And I think part of that will be dependent on the success that StarCrossed finds and sort of if we're able to continue sustaining our development off of this launch, which is a big reality for indies, right? You're trying to create a runway, right, to make more games.
Yeah, you got to make that momentum and everything. Exactly.
But for me personally, like I am working on a couple other game projects with other indie teams. I also work on educational games. I'm really passionate about that. And I also work with an organization called Code Coven, where we run online boot camps for game development and coding, specifically for people of marginalized genders. So we're ramping up classes for that again. And as I said, like teaching and like empowerment through games and technology is something I'm really passionate about. So that's probably going to be consuming a lot of my time in the future. And then I'll get back to making more games.
Well,
very awesome.
Yeah, those are all very noble pursuits.
Thank you. It's just something that is really important to me. I think anyone can make a game, and I think making games is awesome and cool. And I think it's just a creative way to express yourself, and I want more people to be able to do it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Francesca, I'm glad that we connected. We seem like kindred spirits in the gaming space, and
gosh, yeah.
and I love that the indie game space has allowed for that. Like I said, I've talked to plenty of folks who work with AAA developers, and they're lovely as well. But there's something about like the indie music scene, the indie gaming scene seems to have this kind of camaraderie that I feel like isn't in every industry. And so I'm really grateful for you coming on the show, checking out my stream, and hopefully you will come back again later on when you have other stuff to plug. But before we wrap up, I would love for you to just kind of let folks know where they can find you on the internet and find the stuff that you work on so they can get it as it comes out or that is out now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Chesky, so that's CESCHIII. If you want to learn more about StarCrossed, we're on Twitter at PlayStarCrossed or PlayStarCrossed.com. But you can also find us on Steam, the Switch eShop, Xbox One store. We're all over the place now, which is really fantastic. So you can find us on those marketplaces. And I mostly use my Twitter just to plug about upcoming work or exciting things that I'm doing. So you can check out what I'm up to there. I like to stay busy, so there's always a ton of different stuff going on.
I can relate to that as someone who hosts four different podcasts. I get
dang.
the hustle. Yeah. That reaction is the reaction I tend to get lately, and my brain's like, I don't understand why people react that way.
I used to do podcasting, and just the time commitment to the prepping and the recording and the audio editing afterwards. I am very impressed.
Thank you. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky that I have Geoff by my side for this show. It definitely makes it easier. Only one of the shows I do by myself. The other ones have co-hosts because I would go crazy.
So would we all.
Yeah, that's true. But thanks again for being on the show. We will definitely have you back to promote other stuff. Folks should go check out all the games that you're working on. And if you haven't bought StarCrossed yet, go buy it. It is one of the most lovely and fun times I've had playing a multiplayer game ever. It's really easy to pick up and learn, and then difficult to master in all the way the best kind of action-y games are. So definitely go check that out. We are also, of course, a part of the Certain POV Network, which is where you can find tons of podcasts like this one. We very much recently added a ton of new podcasts to the network. By the time this episode actually airs, it'll be old hat that we have shows like Let's Rewatch and Dole Whip and Dreams and Circle of Friendship. So if you want to find out more about those other shows or this show, if this is your first time listening, you can go to certainpov.com. Please, as always, thank you for supporting us and listening.
Yeah, please. Join the conversation on Discord. Check out all of Francesca's work. Check out what we have on the network. Let us know what you think of StarCrossed. Let us know what you think of narratives in indie development. Where do you find the strongest connections to gameplay experiences and story coming together? We want to hear from you because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
We've made difficult decisions.
And there are still more ahead of us.
2 people aren't enough to save the galaxy.
We need the toughest,
smartest,
deadliest allies.
We need you.
We need you to join us.
And listen to Reignite,
a certain point of view podcast about storytelling,
love,
and Mass Effect.
Join us every other Thursday as we fight for the fate of an entire galaxy.
You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts.
Or at certainpov.com/reignite.
We're counting on you.
We should go.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.